Let me now take you into the Proxmox virtual environment. We will see how we can start using software-defined network in Proxmox virtual environment. So here I am on Proxmox virtual environment. So we will log in into the web user interface, and in the data center, you might have multiple Proxmox nodes. So I have right now only one node for this particular tutorial, just to explain you that how you can configure. Of course, depending upon the size of network, if you are into small and medium enterprise, whether you are into the large enterprise of multiple networks, multiple departments, or if you are a service provider where you have multiple networks for multiple clients or multiple tenants, or if you are a cloud service provider, whether your infrastructure is spread across multiple regions, multiple countries even. So wherever it is located, so you can, according to your network size, you can do that. So right now I have one data center here, which is on top left corner. Under this, there is one Proxmox virtual environment. So you will go here into data center, and in data center, you will go down and you will see SDN. So now SDN has these components, which we have already discussed: zone, vnets, and then is IPAM, which is IP address management. So zones is, again, as I mentioned, there are 5 different type of zones that you can create depending upon the type of network. And then once the zones are defined, then you will go into VNet, where you will define the VNet, and then you will create the subnets. So one VNet can have multiple subnets, one zone can have multiple VNets, and then you can have the IP address management. So before you start, you have to make sure that your version is 8.1 or greater. So if you have 8.1 or greater, it will have the software defined network available within this. But if you have upgraded from version 7.2 or 7.4 or version 6, whatever Proxmox earlier you were using, if you have upgraded, so SDN will not be by default available, and it may not work. If you have been using 8.1 or earlier version, you can follow the instructions which are related to installing the software defined network. For others, you can skip that section and continue to the configuration of the SDN in Proxmox virtual environment. Now in SDN, of course, if you expand this, I will go into zone. And as I mentioned earlier, there are multiple options available. If you are in a small network or small office or home lab, you might go with the simple zone. And if you are already using VLANs on your network, and for example, your Proxmox virtual environment has one video recording server, and you have the CCTV network which is on VLAN. So you might go with a VLAN network where your CCTV will be communicating with the CCTV server in the Proxmox virtual environment. Another scenario could be that there is a database server for the developers. So you might create a VLAN for the developers, where developers will only communicate with their VLAN, and within the Proxmox virtual environment, you will create that VLAN zone related to those specific users. And if you create the QNIQ, of course, we have the service provider zones. All the details are available here. I have already explained you in detail what these zones are and for which particular scenario these zones can be used. So simple zone, VLAN zones, where if you're already using VLANs, and then we have already seen QNIQ. So service VLANs can be created here. VXLANs, if you want to use on layer 2, where you will be communicating on the UDP layer or layer 2 networks. Similarly, if you want to use the EVPN when you are using BGP protocol. So this is for more complex networks. So all these zone types are available here. In most of the scenarios, we might be using simple and VLAN. So as I'm using this for the tutorial, and I'm already having only one Proxmox virtual environment, so we don't need to go with the complexity. But if you have multiple tenants, multiple users, so you will go with the zone types. You can create multiple simple zones. So why would you create multiple zones here? Why we cannot create only one simple network and assign the IP addresses? Of course, your Proxmox virtual environment as a cluster, it might grow, it might be bigger, it might be spread across multiple regions, multiple countries, multiple physical locations, or within the physical location, you might have multiple departments, multiple tenants, multiple customers. So depending upon the zones, these zones can be assigned to multiple users or multiple user groups. So if we already know that there are these user groups in permissions, you can see here groups. So you might have multiple user groups. For example, this is for tenant 1, So tenant 1 group can be created here, tenant 2 group can be created, and then these groups can be having the users and so on. Even you can have the pools also, roles also. So depending upon how your users or how your tenants are defined, so you might be going with the multiple zones for the tenants. So it's important to understand that if your network is so big, so you might create the users. And of course, when you are a service provider, when you are even a cloud service provider, through API, you will be connecting the users. So if you have a new user created on, or a new company created on the cloud infrastructure, so there will be a user or a group created, and according to that you might have pools of the resources created. Within these pools you might have these zones already defined. So depending upon how big your network is, you can define these all resources. So SDN is also one of the network resource that you will create, and the zones which you are creating within the network. But before that, if you click on SDN, you will see there is already one software defined network, which is a local network. So local network is already there. And what is that local network? If I expand PVE, you can see here, this is my local network. You have already seen VMBR 0, VMBR 1, where we connected these two virtual bridges with the physical network. So what was the physical network? If I go back here to PVE and network, you will see here VMBR 1 and VMBR 0. These were two virtual bridges. These were connected to the physical ports. So these are two physical ports where our Proxmox virtual bridge is, Linux bridge is created, and these are linked to this. So these two networks, or these two networks which are defined, these are already there in the local network. So we will be now creating the software defined network. Of course, in SDN, this network is already available, but we will be creating one new. You will see a new network will appear here the moment we will create the complete zone, vnets and IPAM. So in zone, we will be creating our first simple zone. So we will create the name of this. It will be simple one. Why I'm saying simple one? You might create a for a VLAN. So if you are creating for VLAN, so you will create a VLAN zone 1. So I will do simple 1 as a simple zone 1. And now you can see IP address management. So IP address management by default is PVE, which means that PVE will take care of the IP address management. You can have the resource pool, which is outside. For example, if you are using the Netbox IPAM plugin or PHP IPAM plugin and so on. So depending upon how you want to go with it, we will go with integrated PVE, which is already available inside the Proxmox virtual environment. So DNS server, we have not defined any DNS servers. It will go with the default DNS server, which is the Proxmox virtual environment. So whatever gateway Proxmox is using, it will use that DNS. So we will not use anything else here. DNS server, reverse DNS, we'll just leave these options blank. But one important aspect is make sure that you enable the DHCP automatic. So automatic DHCP should be enabled when you create a zone, so that this particular zone will get the IP addresses once the virtual network is assigned to a specific virtual machine or container. So we'll be clicking on automatic DHCP and click on add. The moment you click on add, you can see here state is new and this particular zone is created. Now zone is the first step. As I mentioned, this is a virtually isolated network zone. It could be in a different region, it could be a different country, it could be within the same infrastructure and so on, depending upon how you want to create. So we created one simple zone right now. Now what we'll do, we will create the virtual network. So I will click this virtual network here. Now this is simple. In zone you have to define that what kind of zone you will go for, whether you will go for VLAN. So if it is VLAN, you will have to define the bridge, to which physical bridge it will be connected. So if I show you here, so we have the virtual bridges here within the Proxmox. I have just duplicated the page to show you how the virtual bridge will work. So if you see this VMBR 0 and VMBR 1, so if the VLAN is assigned to this particular virtual network, so you will go here and in the Proxmox zones, when you are creating the VLAN zone, you will define with which bridge it will be connected. For example, if it is VMBR 0, and then your ID will be, for example, VLAN 10. And this will be that particular zone which you can create. So depending upon your network type, you can of course define this. So to keep it simple, to keep it easy for everyone to understand, so I have created one simple zone. Now I'll create the VNet. VNet is again a virtual network. So I will create the first virtual network. Again, the name should be simple. So I will create the way we have VMBR0, VMBR1, and so on. You can see here, these were the Linux bridges, which is connected to the physical port. So it was VMBR0, VMBR1. We can also create in a similar way the network virtual networks. So I will create VNet1. So this will be my VNet1, and in which zone this VNet1 will be. As we have already created the zone, I will be assigning it, or I will be creating it within the simple one which was created here. Now, this is not the VLAN aware, of course. If it was VLAN aware, if the zone was related to VLAN, so we would have created the VLAN aware and we could tag to a specific VLAN. But this is simple. This is not a VLAN. This is a simple network that I'm creating. So we will click on create. Now, again, it will show me that network is being created. It is pending changes with simple one zone. So this is right now created. So I will now click this. The moment I click this, now I can create the subnet within this. If you don't click this, of course, you will not get this option available here. So you have to click, or you have to select in which virtual network you want to create the subnet. Now, when you want to assign, because we have not yet gone through any IP address or any range of the virtual network, now that we have to define within the subnet. So I'll be creating my first subnet here. So you can see here in subnet, you have to mention here the CIDR, as you have seen here in the physical network when we were talking about. So in VMBR, you can see here in VMBR, we assigned the IPv4 address to this particular Linux bridge because the CIDR was already defined in the physical network. And what is that physical network? It was, of course, my 192.168.240.1 or 100.1. So if you see here VMBR1, which is my normal network, it has the IP address of 192.168.240.2, and the gateway for Proxmox is 192.168.240.1, which is the pfSense which I'm already using on my physical network. But now we are creating a software defined network for the Proxmox virtual environment, which will be isolated. Logically, it will not have any link until we establish that. We will see in detail in next videos. Now we will create our first subnet within the virtual network. Of course, our IP range, you can see here 192.168.240.2, which is my local subnet within my physical network, of course. And this is extremely important if you move your Proxmox virtual environment to anywhere outside. So you don't need to change the IP addresses of all your virtual machines or containers, because now you are dependent on the virtual networks or software defined networks within Proxmox virtual environments. So you will not need to change any configuration the moment you take your Proxmox virtual environment with you outside. So I'll be creating the first network here. It could be any range, any local IP address range. So I will be choosing the simple ones. So I will go with 10 series, CIDR range 10.10.10.10, or anything that you like the most. As my Proxmox virtual environment might go much bigger, so I will be accordingly creating those IP address ranges. So I will start from 10 and then 10.11, 10.12, and so on. So I will start with 10.10.10.0. So this will be my subnet. The network bit will be 24 bits, so /24. And what will be the gateway? Gateway will be, of course, of this network. We will create our own gateway, which will be 10.0.0.1. So this is now the gateway. And you need to make sure that you click on this SNAT. SNAT will make sure that this particular network is able to communicate with the internet through your Proxmox virtual environment physical network. Because you can see here, if I go back here to VMBR0, VMBR0 doesn't have any gateway. Here you can see there is no gateway, but VMBR1 has the gateway. So it is 192.168.240.2 and it has the gateway. So in order to communicate with the internet, any subnet which is defined in the software defined network through the Proxmox, through this one, it will be communicating the gateway to the outside this particular network. Now we will go here and we will just make sure that gateway is defined here, subnet is defined here, and click on create. Now here is a mistake. What is that mistake? Because my network range is 10.10.10 /24. Of course, gateway should also be within the same range because 24 bit is there. Of course, we have to make sure that 24 bits are the same network bit. So we will be using 10.10.10.1. So this the first IP address of this network will be the gateway. Make sure SNAT is checked here and then click create. I will tell you DHCP range also. First of all, let us click on create. Now subnet has been created within the vnet and vnet is created within the zone. So this zone was created, and in this zone we already mentioned that automatic DHCP. When we mentioned automatic DHCP, of course, we need to make sure that we provide the DHCP range also in this vnet. In this subnet, we have to define that range. So I will double click this again and I will click on DHCP ranges. And here I will define my first DHCP range, which will be within the same network, which is 10.10.10. And it will be maybe from 100. And I will be giving the IP addresses to 10.10.10.200, for example. So 100 IP address ranges will be there. Then of course I can define the static mapping also, that I will show you once we have started assigning the virtual machines and the containers to this. Click OK. Now what has happened that you have completely created your zone and network. Now this subnet is created. If you go into zone and hover over it, and if you click here on a new state, so it shows you pending changes, and vnet also new, it shows pending changes, and if we click here it shows pending changes. So what we need to do, we need to go to SDN and we click on apply. The moment you click apply, now the configuration will be saved. And if I go here to zone now, you can see here zone is now saved already. VNet is already saved and our subnet is already saved. Now, if you click on IPAM, you will be able to see a complete tree structure of your software defined network. So you have zone, which is simple, and within this zone we have one VNet or virtual network created. Of course, you can have multiple VNets created depending upon the size of your network or depending upon the type of your network. If it is multi-tenancy, multi-department, multi-type of devices and so on, depending upon that, you will create the multiple zones and multiple virtual networks. Within this virtual network, we created this subnet, and within this subnet, now these are the devices. So our first device is this Proxmox virtual environment, which is working as a gateway also, and its IP address is 10.10.10.1. Now, the time has come that we need to assign this vnet1 similar to we were having this VMBR0, VMBR1. Similar to that, we have created our first virtual network, which is vnet1. And this has to be now assigned to virtual machines and containers. So what we'll do, we will just go back here to any of the virtual machine or container. For example, this is one of the containers, 102. I will go here and you see here, these are different options here. And if I click on network, I can go to network, which is already there. Click this, in fact double click this, or simply click this and edit this. So I will edit, and now you can see here the bridge right now is the Linux bridge, which is VMBR. Now we have created a software defined bridge, which is vnet1. You can see here it will appear in the list once every configuration is saved. It will appear in list. I will just simply click this and click on vnet1 and click on OK. So now what has happened that this particular Linux container is associated with the software defined network. Now if I go back again to data center, and if I go here to SDN, and if I go to IPAM, now you will see that 102, this container is now appearing here, and its IP address is already assigned 10.10.10.100 because we defined that this should be the range. So what we can do, we can change this IP address to static map. So I will just click edit, and this will be a static mapping. You can see edit DHCP mapping. Instead of 100, I will do it 10.10.10.2. So I will just do it. So whenever this particular container is live, LXC container, so it will get the IP address too. Similarly, if I go here to, for example, this particular server, which is Home Assistant. So I want, this is a virtual machine now, and I want this virtual machine also to get the IP address from the software defined network, and it should be inside the software defined network. Right now, again, you can see here 102 is already there. So I will go to Home Assistant, which is my virtual machine. And in virtual machine, I will again go to hardware. These are different options, but we will go to hardware. And in hardware, you can go here to network devices, double click this, and instead of VMBR1, I will be choosing VNet1. Okay. And if I go back to the software defined network in the data center. And here SDN IPAM, you can see here 106 is having now IP address 10.10.10.100, but I want in the same way I have created here, so it will be 6. So I will click edit and I will change the static map to 10.10.10.6. Now its IP address will be changed to 10.10.10.6. And similarly, I can go back to other virtual machines and containers. For example, this is agent DVR. I also want its network to be changed. Instead of physical network, I want to do it in a software defined network, vnet 1. So home assistant is already moved, and these are two servers. And in fact, Ivantoy, which is stopped right now, I can also change its uh, network bridge to vnet 1 and okay. Now I can also start this, and let me make sure that it starts at boot. And for Docker also, it already starts at boot, and agent DVR, I will make sure it starts at boot. So these are the configuration that I might have missed during the setting up of this. Okay, home assistant starts automatically at boot and so on. Now if I go back again to data center, and in data center software defined network, and in software defined network you can see here IPAM, and you can see these are all my servers. So I will just change this IP address also. Instead of 10.10.10.101, I will do 10.10. This is 4, so it will be 10.10.10.4. So this is how I will start naming or start giving the IP address to my devices on the network. And 10.10.10.7, these are all the services or servers or virtual machines or containers. So now this is nicely defined here. So you can have another, for example, network also. This network is, for example, for servers. You can create another subnet for the containers. So you might define the separate network for containers and so on. So depending upon how you want to communicate with your network, so you can define that. So now we have this particular network which is already created here. And if I want to ping to the outside network from these network, for example, this is one of the servers, Docker. If I go here to console, and in console, if I ping 10.10.10.1, which is the gateway, so it will give me the response from there. And if I want to ping 192.168.240.1, it also gives me response back. It means that I'm able to communicate with the gateway also. So to that gateway, of course, how I'm able to connect, because this particular network already has internally within the software defined network routing defined. So I can now even ping to google.com also, so it will give me the response back. So DNS and everything is working fine, so it is giving me response back. So everything is working fine here on this particular software defined network. So I'm not dependent on the external network or external devices to provide me the IP address or to give the IP addresses to my virtual machines or containers. These are internally now taken care through the software defined network. How it is beneficial, so I can take this Proxmox virtual environment and I can move it physically anywhere on any network. So simply we will plug in the gateway to it, and that's it. Everything else will start working fine. This is how your network will look like. Home assistant also, you can see here, if I click on console, you can see its IP address is now 10.10.10.106. I can reboot it. If I click here and reboot, now it will get the new IP address because we have defined the static for this. So once it is started, it will get the new IP address. But what is the challenge now? Why I'm showing you this? If I show you from my system, am I able to communicate with this particular network? From here, I need to, of course, communicate with the virtual machines or the containers which are there. Of course, these are internally communicating with each other, and these are also able to communicate outside the Proxmox virtual environment for any machine. For example, now let us go to Home Assistant. Home Assistant might have got the new IP address, which is 10.10.10.6, which we defined already in the SDN IPAM. So this static map is already defined here. But if I try to ping from my network, if you see here, ping 10.10.10.6, so it will not give me any response. The reason is because my network is still not able to understand that how to route to it. So I will explain you this in the next video. because this needs explanation of the routing. So in this video, we have talked about the software defined network and how we can configure it. We have configured zone, we have configured VNet, we have configured the subnets. And once we have configured all of that, then we define the IP range, and then we assign the VNet, whatever VNet name you created, we assign those to the virtual machine or containers. You can have multiple virtual networks for multiple type of devices or multiple type of users or tenants and so on, depending upon how you want to do it. I can have a separate virtual network for the machines and separate virtual network for the containers. Network will grow bigger, so I will not have that complexity. So let us continue to the next lecture and understand how we will be able to now communicate with the SDN from our physical network. So let us continue to the next lecture.